Hey there, and welcome back to the NCMU podcast, where we're dedicated to raising up and equipping the next generation of nerd culture ministers and missionaries. My name is Bubba Stallcup, founder and CEO of Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined today with Chris Mikesell, next-gen pastor at HopeCity Church in Winston-Salem out of North Carolina, where he and his wife head up a thriving disability ministry. Hey, Chris, what's up, man?
Hey, what's going on?
Yeah, not mentioned in that little intro is that you and I, man, we're friends. We go back.
Yes.
I think, legitimately speaking, we go back 7 years now.
Has it been that long since the first one?
I just got a little thing on Facebook talking about how old LTN was, and it was right around that point where you got introduced to LTN and we met.
Yeah, I was friends with April Lynn through Dice Throne, which we can get into later. But and then
I don't see how we can't get into it. Yeah,
you have to. I feel like it's pretty much LTN. And then I went to the first LTN con, my very first any con like that. And then we played Parks together.
Oh, did we?
Yeah. I think you taught me Parks. And then you gave me Quacks because you hate it.
Well, just because, and anybody who's listening that likes that game or made that game, I'm not going to say anything derogatory about it. I will just 100% say that game is not for me. It is just not for me. So,
and it's funny because that is one of the few games. If I ask my wife, she will play that game. Like it is one of her. What? She loves it.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be a part of that and bonding moment for you and your wife. Which beautiful. We're going to talk about her in just a little bit. So before we bury the lead too much, you and I know each other, met through Love Thy Nerd. And, like I mentioned, you are a next-gen pastor at a church, HopeCity Church in North Carolina. And I just had the opportunity to come back from speaking at, those of you that are watching online, this RF Refuel, your young men's retreat that you guys do every year. Fantastic, wonderful, a lot of crazy dude stuff, a lot of really good spiritual moments as well. And so let's kind of backtrack a little bit for just a second. Tell us Chris, what was your call like? We'd like to kind of ask that question a little bit on the podcast here. What was it like for you to be called into maybe not even just like full-time vocational ministry, but how did you know that God was tugging on your heartstrings?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I grew up in a really small town in Michigan. I was adopted, and so I've just always kind of I was adopted into a family that loved the church. Wasn't no foster care, just like straight adoption. 6 weeks old, adopted to Gary and Shirley Mikesell. So spent my life growing up in the church, and the church has always been a place of safety and like enjoyment for me. I don't know if it's because it was a small church, so I was like big fish in a small pond type thing. It seemed like every area I went into, whether it was my family, church family, I've always been a much different person than a lot of people around me. I am the loud, wild, energetic kid.
I can confirm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm that. And so I think I've just always, for some reason that's drawn people to me, and especially in the church type world, that has been something that I've just always felt comfortable in. And so I got saved at a young age, baptized at a young age, all those types of things. But I remember my first real experience with, ministry or like excitement was at a youth convention when I was 12 years old. The denomination I'm part of does these big youth conferences every 3 to 4 years. And so our first one was in Chicago. And I remember going there, first time away from my parents, first time like kind of on my own with this is my pastor and I and like a few other people from our church. And I remember going big city, Chicago, just like getting swallowed up in it. But as an extrovert, I'm all about it. What?
Did you go to the Bean?
No, but we went to a place called Ed Bevick's. Yeah, have you ever been to Ed Bevick's? Do you know that place? Huh. It's like it's a restaurant where they pay people to be rude to you. So
okay, I've been like to the one that you can't say on this podcast.
Yes, yeah. So that, but as a 12-year-old, when you see people like yelling at you and cussing at other people, you're like, "What? I'm all about this world. I don't know what's happening, but I'm all about this."
You guys went there on a youth trip?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, my group wasn't cussing, but yeah, but it was an experience. It was an experience. I could tell you an off-air story later, but it was an experience. So yeah, first time in any of that type of world. And I remember going the last session. I remember the speaker talking about it and giving a call. And it was just kind of a generic, like, hey, if you feel called to anything or want to give your heart to Jesus, come down to the altar. And so I went down there, and I remember they give you the little follow-up cards. You know, I mean, every person who went to youth campus filled out a follow-up card, right?
Yep.
So I remember being down there with thousands of other people and filling out this card. And it's the basic, like, have you given your heart to Jesus? Have you rededicated or given your heart to Jesus for the first time, rededicated? And then the last one was felt called to ministry. And I'm pretty sure the message wasn't even about that. I never talked about that, but like, I just felt called to felt led to check that box. And so I did. And like,
you're like, dude, if I can take a group of teenagers into a restaurant and get cursed at, like,
if that this just is what it is, let's do it. In life. Yeah, absolutely. Have towel fights and all this stuff. Like, let's figure it out. Do we have time for a side story? I can tell you this story.
Absolutely.
My first convention, didn't realize this till later, but of course, 12-year-old boy, I'm at a place where there's a lot of girls. And so I'm very much trying to figure out how I can talk to as many girls as possible with the great game of a 12-year-old. Right. And so like, I got this. Yeah. And I remember
a little Rizzler, as the kids would say these days.
Yes, tons of Riz. I got a call from our hotel room, and there's this girl that said she wanted to meet up. And so I was like, all right, we can do this. Like, I'm fine. Bring my buddy. Like, maybe at like the game area, right? And so we go down.
Called your hotel room from her hotel room.
Yes, called the room.
That was the thing.
Absolutely, no cell phones. Room right here. Nope. Now finding me on MySpace. It's the room. And so we go down there and looking, nobody shows up. Calls again the next night. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I gotta come again. Meet up. Nothing. Turns out, total prank on me. It was the senior pastor's niece. Like, absolutely pranked me. Everyone but me knew about it. And my life was ruined. That's pretty much the moral of the story. But it was an awful experience. But yeah,
that's good.
So
that's good, man.
I love that world, right? Like all the convention, the energy, the people, the excitement, like I loved it. So, but yeah, felt called to ministry there, and remember going through high school and trying to figure out if it's really what I want to do. And, I remember I was going between that and for some reason in my mind, I thought I could be a computer programmer, even though I know nothing about computers or math. Like I know nothing about anything. And so for some reason I thought I could do that. And so I toyed with that idea, but I was like, no, I'm not gifted. I don't know what I'm doing. So I ended up going to school for ministry and stuff like that. It's just always been, I just love people. And so I tell people I don't have a ton of skills. I don't have a lot of marketable skills. So I have to figure out how to love people and
absolutely, yeah,
be in relationships with people. Cause outside of that, I'm in trouble. So, just went through my undergrad and been in ministry since 2010, full-time ministry since 2010. Was a youth pastor for, 13 years in youth ministry. And then the last couple I've been in, it's a long time.
Lifetimes as a youth pastor.
Yeah, it's insane. And so did that there. And then the last couple years have been in my next gen role, which my primary responsibility is looking after our birth through fifth graders. And then our co-next gen pastor is over 6th through 12th graders. And then we co-lead our young adult group. And then I've been camp director, and then what you were talking about earlier, our refuel guys retreat. I'm still directing to that too. So I still get a chance to still scratch the itch of youth ministry and do crazy and insane things and still get away with it. It keeps me young. So that's fun.
And you like it. I think we've had a lot of people on this podcast that are former youth pastors, an obscene amount of people who are former youth pastors. We always talk about it as it's not a stepping stone, or at least it shouldn't be a stepping stone in ministry. Correct. But it is definitely on almost every path. especially when it comes to nerd culture and stuff like that. Because the thing that we get accused of all the time is, why are you doing those childish things, those things that kids do? And it's like, well, but I'm an adult, right? Question mark.
Yeah.
Like at least I play one on TV, like something like that. And so let's kind of turn the corner a little bit. Like how does what you're doing in ministry and your calling, and maybe even talk a little bit about Refuel, because people that are seeing it on YouTube, they're probably like, that font looks familiar. I think I've seen that before. Like how is your draw into nerd culture, which you mentioned Dice Throne, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. How is your draw into nerd culture? How is that like being fed into and helping to sustain your call into ministry?
Yeah, it's funny because like when I got into ministry, I mean, I'm 22, 23, so I still feel like I'm athletic. So like I try to do all the sports things and stuff like that. And usually that's like a mode of youth pastors. Like we also are competitive and we do sports so that, or do games. Yes. We do games in youth groups so that we still feel dominant, right? So we still win things against middle school kids. So I did all that stuff in my early 20s. But I think as I got older and became a dad and just got busy and stuff like that, I had to find a new interest that wasn't playing sports because I just didn't have time to play sports. And that, like, playing games has always been a part of my life. So it wasn't part of my immediate family, but my pastor growing up, I lived like across the yard from him, so I could sprint in my backyard and get to his house. It was a meeting of opportunity kind of, because my parents they were in their mid 30s when they adopted me, and they're not into sports. They don't care about any of this stuff. So small rural community, my dad grew up farming, that type of thing, goes into cars and oldies and everything I'm not, right? So we didn't connect a lot that way, like hobbies wise. But when the small church I went to, when they hired our pastor, who's still there, has been there for 20 plus years, he had 3 daughters that were much younger than me. And so he didn't have a son. I didn't have like a young guy to like play sports and stuff with. So like we just kind of connected that way. And so I would hang out at his house, him and his wife, and they would play card games all the time. They would play.
Oh, okay.
So growing up in Michigan, there's a game called euchre, which is a northern game. Yeah. Have you heard of euchre? Yeah. It's heard of euchre. Yeah. It's a game you play with 9 through ace, and it's like half the deck and stuff like that. But people are serious about it. You have a partner, and it's like a less intense version of spades or hearts or things like that. So I grew up playing those types of games. There's a game called Rook. And I remember being in high school and going to my pastor's like family reunion type thing, or family Christmas. And it's the first time me and one of his nephews got called to like the adult table to play Rook. And we thought we made it, right? Like we're playing with the adults now. Like this is a big deal. Don't screw it up type thing. But I just always grew up playing. So for me, ministry, what like I would see time after time my pastor bringing people into his home to play cards, and like that's how they would sit around a table and connect. So I thought that's what you did. Like you just connected with people around a game. Like it was a great icebreaker. So I do that, and then I go into college and I start playing Catan like a billion other people, right? That was kind of the strategy gateway game for us as well. And we would slowly start playing that with people, my wife and I, like when we were going, but it wasn't until probably I moved to North Carolina, so about 30, that I dove into and realized the real level of things that can unlock through games. And so something that was a passion when I took over a guys retreat with Refuel, a passion I had was I don't want being a guy to be associated with guns and helicopters and camo and manly things, bench pressing like 400 pounds and stuff like that. Only. Like I think when it comes to what it means to be
only like you want like it can be those things also.
It can, yes. If you bench press 400 pounds, like you are absolutely a man. So
thank you for acknowledging how much I can bench press.
Yeah, you got it, Bubba. I see the camo shirts. I've seen the camo shirts. All that stuff. Yeah, the face paint. But I kept having kids in my youth group that are not that. Right. I see these kids in my youth group who are autistic or are super shy or like video games or are indoor kids. And I had my sports and hunters and all that stuff too, but I saw this group of kids that they would come to these things, but I could see the disconnect. And I was starting to have the disconnect. The older I got, the less interested I was into those things. And even sports to a point, like the less interested I was about watching sports on TV and going to sporting events. And I would do it, but it wasn't the driving force like it used to be. And so when we created a youth group or youth refuel, we kind of relaunched it. I was like, man, how can we meld these worlds? And so it was a big deal to me that we let kids know it's like, hey, what you're into, your hobbies do not define what it means to be a man, and does not define who God has called you to be. And God can call you to be a leader in your home and a provider and a protector and all these things. And you can like video games or you can like Dungeons and Dragons. So we launched Dungeons and Dragons at our refuel retreat, but we called it RPG Adventure so that it would freak people out. And so I was like, I don't need somebody to hear about this and think that we're doing snake wielding and all these types of things, right? And so seances. So we launched that this last year refuel. We had board game nights. They played a 30-person game of Mafia in a room together. And so it was like, I'm like, man, and every year we've done this, we've grown. Like the first year I took it over, we were a little less than 100 kids probably. This last year, I don't know if I told you this, Bubba, but we had 178 kids at refuel with almost 50 adults. And so it was insane to see this. And we didn't reinvent the wheel. I don't think so. Like we leaned into kids' nerdom. We leaned into kids. We lived in North Carolina. And so the weekend refuel was a Duke, North Carolina basketball game. So we showed the Duke, North Carolina basketball game. Also at the same time, which you can speak to, Bubba, didn't even know it, was Royal Rumble?
Yeah, the WWE Royal Rumble.
Yeah. And so we had a group of guys that were sitting around a laptop. We had the UNC Duke game on the big projector screen. And then we had probably 20 guys, and it kept growing around this small computer watching wrestling and being so loud.
The worse the game got, the bigger the crowd around the Royal Rumble.
That's like what it was.
Tiny, like 20-inch laptop screen, right?
Yeah, it was awesome. And so what I saw is like, man, when we gave people a opportunity to lean into what they liked, they would come. They would be all about it. And again, you can speak this, Bubba, but like what I've seen is it's easy to say nerd in terms of board games and video games and Marvel and anime and cosplay and all those things. But I think being a nerd about something is just being passionate about what you care about. Like whatever your hobby or passion is. There's a guy, there used to be a pastor in our district that went to a pen convention, like writing pen convention. Like he was nerdy about pens. So it's like there is a convention for any hobby, it seems like nowadays, that you're into. And so at Refuel, as I've gotten older, it's like, man, I love seeing people deep dive into their passion. Like, and I saw like my dad growing up, he'd go to car shows. Yeah. That was like that was probably the first convention I've ever went to, was car show conventions, because we would get into these parks with hundreds of old classic cars blasting oldies music. My dad used to host a benefit car show for the Cancer Society because his best friend died from cancer. And it's like, I would help him put it together. And it's like, that's the first avenue I had into something like that. But people come to what they care about. And so for Refuel, for us, it was a big passion for me, is creating a space for kids. As we navigate through Refuel, I want at least one thing that kids would care about. So we had D&D, we had board games, we had zip lines, we had 22 rifles, we had basketball game, we had wrestling, like we had all these things, RC cards, Super Smash Brothers tournament, Mario Kart tournament, like anything we could think of, so that kids could, we have a 9-hole disc golf course at the campground. Anything these kids could do to connect with leaders and to each other, like we were about it. We were going to say yes. And so it's been working so far.
See, and I love that so much. As somebody who deals with tons of people regularly who feel like they don't fit in a place where it's promoted to be very welcoming, be that a church or a convention, right? I think both kind of fit into the mold where, you go into a church, at least ideally, right? You go into a church and everybody's welcome, unless you dress a certain way, or you have a certain thought process, or you don't act right while you're in church, or you smoke, or whatever it is, right? Like there's a thousand reasons why people feel ostracized by the church community. But the same thing is true about conventions. It's like, all right, hey, you can come here unless you like Star Wars 7, 8, and 9. If you do, then you're out of here. Forget it. So I love that you guys did that with Refuel, and I watched it firsthand. I saw some of the most true identifiable man things that were happening. You guys did a beast feast, right? Yeah. Which was just tons of meats, and I don't think there was a single vegetable in the lineup. It was just
no. Mac and cheese. It feels like a vegetable.
Yeah, mac and cheese is practically a vegetable. I think so. Yeah. And then you had tomahawk throwing, and there was basketball, and all sorts of stuff. Really like dude stuff. And then the nerd things. And so I loved that. Not because I'm a nerd, but I think that there is something to be said about this idea of identifying with something, having true representation, seeing yourself in something. I think it invites acceptance, right? Yeah. It's not just, I'm going to tell you you're accepted, and then you're going to have to find something that we do that you like to do. It's like, no, we're going to do your thing. And so that kind of leads into some of the stuff that I want to talk with you about, that you and your wife are doing with the disabilities ministry, right? And the reason that is, I think it's so closely linked to nerd culture ministry, is because a lot of the people that we deal with, or that we are, right, that come into this space, have been pushed off by quote unquote normal society, right? These neurotypical environments. They're neurospicy, or neurodivergent, or on some sort of spectrum, however you want to put that. We had Dr. Lamar Hardwick, come and speak with us at Nerd Culture Ministry Summit last year. And that was one of our most well-received and highly reviewed lectures. And he mentioned something that I thought that was just absolutely wonderful. And I wonder if you can kind of speak on that and how you've seen this work, and then talk about what you guys are doing at Hope City. But he said, if you start with the least of these, start with the people that need the most help, right? There's always going to be space for everybody else. But if you're starting with the quote unquote normal people, then it's really hard to fit. We don't use the term special needs really in large spaces, but then some people do. And if you do, that's totally fine. But you can't really fit those special and specific needs into the areas that are left over. But if you start with that, there will always be room for other people. So talk a little bit about that. What are you guys doing over there? How are you seeing it, not just in nerd culture, but in general, just kind of affect the overall health and wellness of your church? Yeah.
I would kind of word that in our terms, we use the words disability and accommodate a lot. So I would say to that is if you accommodate for the disability, you're going to catch everybody, right? And so many times we've seen when we accommodate for the disability, whether it's we provide fidgets, or we provide an edge of the curriculum, or we provide our sensory room, which I'll talk about in a second. So many times that happens, and it fits for everybody. Right? Everybody's better for that. We saw that my kids play Taekwondo, and my oldest son, we accommodate sometimes through that. And he doesn't like loud noises. So they were accommodating, they would smash these paddles together, and then they'd kick it. And so they accommodated that way. And the other thing that they would do is in a 45-minute session, they would do all of their, it's called the Pumse. It's they would say different numbers and do different poses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where they would do all of those things for about 30 minutes, and then they would do some kicking at the end. And what we said is my son was struggling with that much attention and just that repetitive thing. So hey, could you break it up in the middle of it? Well, after a few weeks doing that, they started doing that for everybody. Like the whole thing, they would do the poomsae, and then they would do a kicking line. Then they go back to the poomsae. So like what we accommodated for one, it's like, oh, you know what? All kids may like a break. All kids may enjoy having a break in the monotonous of things. And then we can go back to it. Like kids recover quickly than we think, or quicker than we think. So tangent aside, yeah, in our ministry, this was something that got birthed out of a necessity a little bit. Like we saw a little gap in this space, in the disability space. And so when my wife and I was trying to figure out what next steps were going to be for our church or for where we're going to serve and raise our family and all those types of things, we were talking to the pastor of my church that I'm at now, and he heard that we had a heart for disability ministry. So he came to our camp and he met with us. And I vividly remember he was turning to me and started talking about things about disability ministry. And then when my wife started talking about it and he realized it was much more her than me, he literally turned his back to me and just talked to my wife. And so when we went there, he's like, hey, I can't pay you a full-time salary, which my wife wasn't interested in right now anyway. And he's like, but I can give you a space and I can try to give you resources. And so we're like, all right, let's see what happens. So since we started at Hope City in October 23, 24, 23, 23, somewhere around there. Anyway, so we started there, and it's been incredible to see how we have, how the disability ministry has already kind of grown from that. Like we've seen, one of the things that we got rid of very quickly was chairs. Like we saw that kids were a lot like kind of uniformed in these chairs. And so we got rid of chairs, and we got fidgets and these things that kids can do. We started welcoming for them to be part of, to enjoy the space that we were in. So we would try to get more active things that weren't confined. But the big things that we did, my wife did two things. One, she started a buddy program. So she started recruiting a team of people that would come, and her heart is for all areas of our church to have, be neuroaffirming and inclusive with people with disabilities, physical, mental disabilities, all that stuff. But the easiest place to jump off, it tends to be in the kids ministry. And so with me also running the kids ministry, it was easier for us to like really go with that vision of things. And so she started recruiting a team of buddies that is at all three of our services. And what I love about what she's done is it isn't specific to like one-on-one. So like, Bubba, if you were a buddy in our ministry, you wouldn't be assigned to the same kid every week. Instead, we would put you in a classroom. So we'd say, hey, go to the 4th and 5th grade classroom. And then as you're there, she also had parents fill out buddy profiles. So it's like, hey, if a kid's walking into our ministry and their parents will share to us that they have autism or they have some sort of disability or thing that they need help with, we know that ahead of time. And so it'd say, hey, Bubba, when you're in this class, Ed has a disability, he has autism. Here's his buddy profile. If you see him struggling, we'll just want you to sit next to him. You can ask him if he wants a break. You can ask him if he wants a snack. You can ask him if he wants to tell you a story, whatever it is, but just kind of hang close to Ed. And then my wife does a good job of training and stuff like that, of knowing how to support him. The other thing that we implemented was we have a sensory room, which is fantastic. It is the coolest room. And what's awesome about that it wasn't built by us. Angela and I had no part of really the vision behind it. We both kind of helped when they were putting it together. But what it was a former student of mine. She needed a project for it's called American Heritage Girls, but it's like a Christian Girl Scout equivalent program. And for her senior project, she needed something that she led from the ground up. And she was looking for projects. And I asked her, I was like, hey, we have the sensory room. Do you want to be part of it? She's like, I was actually thinking that. And I was like, awesome. So she came in and she raised the money. She raised about $5,000 for it. She got her team together and they built this phenomenal sensory room. It has like a tree house in it. It has 2 areas for swings. It has this really cool fish cylinder of fake fish in water that bubbles and all this stuff. That's super cool. There's a whole fidget wall. There's a balance beam. There's a rock wall. There's all of these things in this room. And what's been super cool is people see that room and they assume if a kid goes into a room like that, they'll never want to come out. They'll say it's too fun. And if a kid comes in, they'll never want to leave it. And that just has not been our experience. My wife did a really good job, has done a great job of limiting it to a point like, hey, if you come in here, we're going to do 10 minutes at a time. And then we're going to try to get you back in the class, because our sensory room, part of our heart is we don't want to isolate people with disabilities. We don't want to take them out. We want to put them in an environment where they thrive, in an environment that makes sense for the disability that they have. But we don't want to put them in a classroom together and just say, hey, if you have a disability, you have to be here. So that doesn't make sense. Like, that's not inclusive. Like, that's segregating, and we don't believe in that, right? And so, what we do instead is we have buddies that be in the class with them, and then when they go to the sensory room, they go in there for like 10 minutes, get a chance to regulate, get a chance to get their wiggles out or whatever it is, tell their stories, and then we try to get them back into class so they can be around their peers, for them and for their peers. So everybody knows it's like, hey, it's okay if you have a disability. Like, you don't have to whisper around someone who has a disability, or you don't have to be scared of someone who has a disability. Like, no, both of these things can happen. So we created the space for it, and it's been awesome. What's also been cool is how many kids who don't have a disability still need a sensory room. Like, we've seen a lot with separation anxiety. Like, babies or preschoolers, they have a hard time getting dropped off because they're always with mom, or they're always with dad or grandma or whatever. So they don't want to be separated. So we take them to the sensory room, let them swing, let them like be in a fun environment. And then we've seen them transition back into class, and we've seen the nervousness go away, and we've seen them thrive in that environment. And it's like, it doesn't have to be as scary as it used to be. So kind of what you were saying, that the I can't remember his name, from the summit. Yeah. What he was talking about, it's like, when you care for the least of these, or you accommodate, in our term, when you accommodate for the disability, more than likely it's going to, what you put in place for those who have disabilities can affect everybody. Right? Like, if we put in more play because a kid has ADHD, so you need to have more play in there, so you don't teach for 30 minutes, you teach for 5 minutes and you do something else, all kids can enjoy that. Right? If you have a room for a kid to swing when they're overwhelmed, it helps with a kid who has disabilities. It also helps for the kid who had to drag out fight with his parents on the way into church today, or just suffered because his grandpa passed away, or whatever it is. Like, it's a place for them too. So we just found when you accommodate for the disability, it affects everybody. Everybody can be better because I've seen my teachers be better. I've seen our other students, the peers, thrive from it. Like, there has not been a negative from starting that, in my opinion. Like, it has been something, and it draws people in. Like, we have more and more people know about this, about our ministry, and we're not marketing for it. We're not trying to say, hey, we have all the answers. We're like, hey, we're figuring it out. We have a vision. My wife has a very strong vision for it. She has a very strong reason why she does what she does. And it's paying off. It's been really cool to see.
Well, and I think that there's a lot to be learned about that. And hopefully we hear a lot more about that in the future. We're working on a couple of things that we hope come to fruition. But I know that from our perspective, like just our church perspective, locally, we have had a hard time. I mean, so difficult of a time trying to get some sort of, what we were calling special needs ministry off the ground that is specifically dedicated to, people that are neurodivergent, right? That, may have Down syndrome or are very squarely on the autism spectrum, have diagnoses, that kind of stuff. But what we're seeing is that it's too much of a hurdle for people to get over with no plan in place, right?
That's what it is. Yeah.
And so having a starting point, having, you and, Angela that we can look at and go, hey, how? Just give me one thing to start with. And maybe it's a buddy system, right?
Yep.
Some sort of educational process that I believe 100% in conjunction with things like the sensory room, which I don't know if that came across to everybody as we were talking about that. You didn't say it. I think it needs to be said. That room in your church is only used for that. It is not a classroom.
Yeah.
It doesn't double as something else during the weekdays or anything like that. It is a sensory room that is open to all people. right? To come in. But it was a room that was designed for, neurodivergent A1 since day one that everybody gets to use. So that being able to accommodate for everybody, but very specifically designed for a certain group of people, and then not giving way to say, well, we do have a women's Bible study that needs a place to meet, so they're going to come in and hang out on the swings for an hour every Tuesday. Like that says a lot about where your church is, not just with the idea of this ministry, but the actual implementation of the ministry.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is like our church, our leaders, our pastor and our executive pastor and the leadership team, like the fact that they said yes to everything. Like when we did that, we're like, hey, we're going to have to put holes in the wall. We're going to have to take down things. We're going to have to like really
major construction project. Yeah.
Yeah. To this room. And every time they said yes. Every time they said yes, and they didn't even know all the answers. And I think about that. You've talked about before, Bubba, with your church, how they've supported nerd missions and some other churches that do that. Like what it takes is someone in leadership. It's like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing to say yes. Like I'm willing to partner with someone that does. And that's the biggest barrier of anything. It's like, it's not only, you can find people who are passionate about it, but it's finding people who actually have the influence that's willing to say yes or just get out of the way. And our senior pastor, that's what he did. He said yes and he got out of the way. As we were planning, not once has he tried to ask or implement any of his ideas. Executive pastor, same thing. They knew this was not in their wheelhouse. So not one time, to my knowledge, have they really said, hey, I think the sensory room should have this. Or I really think you should have this program. Or I really think you should do it this way. They said yes, and they got out of the way. Like, hey, you can't spend $1 million on it. Like if you stay in these parameters and you do these things and kind of go through the motions that all the other staff needs to in order to implement projects, like we'll say yes. And they've said yes. And because they bought into it and kind of gotten out of the way so that Angela's vision can be fulfilled. It's done nothing but grow our church, I believe. It's done nothing but bring in other people.
See, and I think that's the mark of really good leadership. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I believe, I don't have the data on this, but I believe that this podcast makes its way into some of the, some of the computer screens or, headphones of pastors or people in leadership that look at people just like you and Angela every single day. Every single day, and are like, wow, man, would be nice if, but we can't because, and then insert all sorts of different ideas and reasons why it just can't work. And so to whomever that person is that is got, the Mikesells on standby, in your neighborhood and in your church, like just go for it. It's the worst thing that could happen is that it fails. The best thing that could happen is that people in your community, not just at your church, but in your community, city, town, wherever you are better loved and served. And they're shown the love of Jesus in and through that stuff. We see it all the time. But maybe you don't. So
what's super cool is like the people that are in Angel's ministry, these are people who weren't serving really in the church beforehand. That's what's super cool. Like these are people who, especially the two other ladies that are on her team with her, like her core team, they were maybe serving in other areas, but they didn't have the ownership that they do now. They were part of a team, but now they are leading this ministry. And her buddies and these people, these are people who are serving in this ministry who haven't been serving in other areas. So it's giving an on-ramp for people. And so it's been cool, man. Like I saw that when we were doing stuff in Refuel too. Like when we offer D&D and we offer these things, I remember one of my leaders now, he wasn't a leader. He wasn't at my church when we started it, but he was just a counselor. And we talked about wanting to do D&D. And the first year it blew up. Like the first session got really full and he came to me, he's like, hey, I can do that. Like I know how to DM. And I've never done this before. Or from my perspective, it's like, I didn't know how to do that. He's like, I can do this. Like, perfect. So he did it. And it was another space for him to serve as not just a counselor, but now he had ownership. So every year he comes back to Refuel, he thinks about how to make his campaign better. Because that's what he's thinking all year long. because he knows that is the thing he gets to do, gets to lead. This isn't a pastor. This isn't somebody who's paid to be there. Like, he's a volunteer who comes to refuel so he can lead D&D. Like, it's super cool.
And he brought another guy with him.
Yeah.
This year, and exploded the board game presence and tabletop, which you didn't really even know about.
No, not at all. Well, that was, Bubba got introduced to my leadership style a little bit this weekend, that weekend. But yeah, that morning I realized that he did that. I was like, hey, can you bring all the board games? So I have to bring none of them. And he goes, yes. I was like, perfect. That sounds great. And that was at 12 o'clock at an event that was going to start at 7. So
wild. The fact that event worked at all still blows my mind. It still blows my mind.
See, Bubba, some of us just live by faith. And we just believe that if we have the right intentions, that the Lord really is going to. So what Bubba is referring to is the fact that we played disc golf Thursday. My event refuel was Friday evening. I pick up Bubba from the airport Thursday morning. We go to have the best banh mi that we've ever had in our entire life.
Gosh.
At this place where we had to stand to eat it because they didn't have indoor seating, but it was worth it. So we had this incredible dinner. We go to play disc golf. It's about to rain. And then I get a phone call that my sound guy was not going to be there for a refuel. And we didn't have a sound option really. And so what Bubba was surprised about is I called my co-leader and told him about that. He's like, it'll be fine. And then we proceeded to play the round of disc golf while we did not have sound for the event that night or the next night. But the Lord provided. And the thing that I knew that Bubba didn't know is I knew I had Bubba who knew how to do sound. And so I was not as worried about it because I had my sound person.
Yeah, you were fine.
Already paying to be there. Yep. So it's like, we're fine. As long as we have speakers in the soundboard, Bubba will figure it out. It'll be fine.
It was wild. I was, the keynote, like leading speaking, and then behind the soundboard when I wasn't on stage speaking. It was just the most wild, like, it really brought me back to my time in youth ministry. It really brought me back.
Because that is youth ministry, man. Like, there's times you were all the things.
Yeah.
At least we didn't make you lead worship.
It's not even hats, man. Like, don't even think about it. Like wearing hats. It's like, it's not even a good, it's not a good one-to-one. They're not hats. Like, it would be like you wearing a shirt and pants and shoes. Like, you need to have them on and you're going to wear all of them. Like, nobody's wearing them for you.
Yep. And there's sometimes you're glad you're in that long sleeve shirt because you're going through bushes of thorny bushes that you have to reach towards something. And you need those long sleeve shirts to protect your skin because you're absolutely going to get cut as you're going through that. But what's funny is, like, at that event, nobody else knew. Like, you do this stuff behind the back, like, everything went so seamlessly.
We had a kid walk by. We had a little lighting console, like one of those little, tiny little lighting consoles. He walked right in front of the table where it was, tripped over the cord that was attached to it. The thing falls face first on the ground, and a fader pops off of it. Good thing it happened in the middle of the day, because we didn't need the lights and we're outside, and so it's not a big deal. But nothing worked properly for like 6 hours, and it was just like, okay. Anyway, like we were saying, next thing, keep going. Just like nobody batted an eye. Like, just the comfortability in the space, because what you guys were not trying to put on, and this is not a dig, but you guys were not trying to put on a big flashy event. You guys were trying to create the best, most appropriate space in order for those young men to experience Jesus. And I think that you did that. Having not a sound man, having our sound man back out at camp would have been a much different conversation than having like a week-long camp. Would have been a much different conversation than for our refuel retreat, right? But the heart behind us too is like we knew the win, right? We knew what the win of that event was going to be, and the win of that event was not going to be contingent on the sound man. Where it is more a camp, like when it is more worship driven and light driven and experience driven in terms of a speaking setting and stuff. That is part of the win. For a refuel, it wasn't, and so
I think too, like we've seen that with I'm going to segue, but we see that back with our disability ministry. Yeah. We know what the win is. My win is not that all the kids are sitting all the time in the class. Our win is not that we create the most relaxing environment for our teachers. Our win isn't that we make sure that all of the curriculum is used every single week. Our win is that every kid that walks in feels like something there is for them. Right? That every kid who walks through, our win isn't even, and this is a topic that my wife's very passionate about. Our win isn't even that the parents with the kids with disabilities get to sit in a service. We care about the parents, but our focus isn't the parents. So many times people will say, and this is where my wife gets on her soapbox a little bit, which I agree with. Like so many times people talk about a disability ministry in terms of the parents. They will say things like, hey, we want to create this space so parents can drop off their kids. So they can go sit in service. It's like, no, that's not our focus. It's great that could be a byproduct, but our focus, and my wife reminds me of this a lot, is our focus is that we want the kids to know they belong, that they were created by God, that they have a vision, they have a place, that everything there is for them. If their parents can have a good experience out in service, awesome. But when they come in our doors, like we're all about our kids. And so our main thing is we want them to hear about Jesus. We want them to know our big idea, to be able to talk about the story. And then outside of that, we just want them to know that they're loved and cared for. And so that's why if they need a snack, we give them a snack. If they want to play in the sensory room, we let them play in the sensory room. If they need to have conversations, we let them have conversations. Angela there's a lady or a girl in our church. She's probably 11 and her family's been coming in the last few months. And Angela was talking to her, hanging out with her in the sensory room while her mom was in a small group. And they were talking about life and they're going through a really hard time. And Angela just kept asking her questions and giving her space and talking and laughing and all that stuff. And at the end of it, she calls my wife Lady. She calls her Lady, not Angela, Lady. But she will give Lady a hug every single time she sees her. And this girl doesn't hug everybody. Like that's not what she does. But like Lady, my wife is her person. And every week when she's there, she comes and she finds Lady and she gives Lady a hug. And now I'm Guy to go with Lady.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you need to get the double name.
Yes. That's what it is. Yeah. And you're kind of like Bubba, like already kind of sounds like a double name. So they may not change your name. Yeah. Maybe it's Bub instead of Bubba, but we can figure it out.
We've got, we'll end here with this story, because we're wrapping up here. We've got a family in our church and, some people are lower on the spectrum than other people are. Yeah. And I think we dance around that a lot, but being able to look at that, see that, and identify that actually helps us better serve that person, right? Better find the things that are going to lead them closer into that acceptance space than further away. Because if we're just going to treat everybody as if they're at this level or this level, then we're really not meeting those people in the spaces where God has placed them. And so I say all that to say this, there's a family in our church that just went through something really horrific and tragic. They lost their dad. And so, and it wasn't something that they were ready for. It just happened. And he's on spectrum. And I got to know them at our missions fair because he came by and saw Love Thy Nerd and hung out with me and talked a little bit about, I think at that moment we talked about Pokemon cards and Yu-Gi-Oh! And like some of that stuff. And that was 2 years ago. And what was really crazy was I watched his mom from across, that we did this in our sanctuary. I watched her from across the sanctuary, just kind of like wide-eyed look at me because her son made a beeline to come and talk to me and then made several rounds and came back and hung out at the booth and talked to me several times after that. And she said, that is huge. Like he does not talk to people. I don't know how to put this gently. He doesn't talk to people. Yeah. And we started having game nights after that. And I told them, I was like, that was big, huh? Like that was a pretty big moment. I identified that with them. but started coming to game nights and all sorts of stuff. And so when we started to build a relationship, my family's been over to their house. We had dinner with them. We've learned about all the things that he likes and dislikes, and some of his triggers and all that stuff, and them as a family also. And so when they had this tragedy that happened to them, I was one of the people that was able to be there when it happened. And so like having that kind of connection, having guy or lady, having those people, be able to connect with them. You can't do that in the same way that you do, like you and I build connections. Like they don't work in the same way, but it doesn't mean they're not as important.
Correct.
And so like, dude, you guys are doing it so much better than we're doing it. And I've told you this before, like I want to soak it all up, learn it, steal it, and implement it as best as we were able to here. But for anybody that's listening to this podcast, like if they have questions or anything like that, and they want to know more, how can they get a hold of you and Angela, maybe, or maybe Angela, and leave you out of the equation?
Yeah, absolutely.
How can they learn more and get a hold of you guys and kind of talk about that?
Yeah, and maybe we can put this in a link in a description or something too. Like my wife has an email. It's a.mikesell@HopeCityNC.com. And then mine's cmikesell@HopeCityNC.com. So it's just a letter different. But that's probably the best way, is through email, and then we can exchange phone numbers and stuff like that. Both of us, Angela Mikesell, Chris Mikesell, we're both on Facebook. You can find us there as well through Messenger or whatever, that way. But yeah, I think, when you're telling your story, Bubba, all I think about is one of my phrases, and especially in youth ministry, but it's true in all ministry, is like, you show up, you do the game nights, you do the ministry affairs, you do all those things, so that every time that you show up for them, you build relationship, right? You build influence. And the cream of that is when bad stuff happens, you get invited into their mess. That is the biggest compliment that we can get as humans, as pastors, as leaders, is when the people we are leading invite us back into the most horrific parts of their life. But that only happens when we invest in all the other areas, where we show up at game nights and we show up at those things. And especially when you're dealing with someone with the kid in the family with someone with disabilities, when you show that you care about the thing that they could be embarrassed about, or the thing that makes them different, or the thing that's in everyone's eyes would separate them from everything else. When you invest in that, dude, you have friends for life.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're doing.
You can't get rid of them.
You can't at all. You are forever there. We have a boy in our ministry, and every time he sees me, I came into the church, and I happened to go to his grandma's viewing. And all it was you're saying Pokemon cards. All it was me asking him what he was listening to on his audiobook. Because my son does something very similar. So I knew he was listening to something on an audiobook. I was like, hey, what are you listening to? And he told me the story that I've never heard of. And then from then on, we're best friends. I get poked. I get my head like this. I get like all the things. I get tackled. He is much bigger than I am. And so we have to wrestle in the middle of the atrium. But it's forever here. Like we are together. We are best friends now. He's friends with my kids and all these things. And it's because I showed up at a funeral. Yeah. I showed up at a place where he was still trying to figure out how to process it, but I showed up and I asked him what he was listening to. It was a question. And now I have a friend for life in this world. And so I don't know. I've seen that a lot in like when I got to go to PAX Unplugged for a big convention. And it's like, I walk into that and I'm like, oh, these are my people. Like this is it. These are all these people who don't have it all together, who will tell you to straight up, this is before we were even doing disability ministry. I desperately want to bring my wife, who doesn't love board games, to a board game convention, because I think to see this, like to see thousands of people who are like, these are our people. These are the people we want to spend time with. If you think you have it all together, like, there's a place for you, but it's probably not in our space, because that's not we're just at that point now. Like we're not about sharing life with people who think they have it all together. But you say you have a disability, or you say your marriage is struggling, or you say you are trying to figure this out and you need help. Not that we have the answers. We just, because we need help, and we're all in the one thing Angela talks about a lot is like, we've realized how nerdiverse we are in the midst of the more research.
It's a spectrum for a reason, my guy.
Yes. Like we are nerdiverse. And so we want to be around nerdiverse people. Like we don't need to be around people who have it all together. So yeah, it's fun, man. We're really enjoying the season.
Oh man.
It's hard.
Well, hey, Mikesell, dude, thank you for hanging out with us and for being a part. We're going to wrap this up right now. But, you know, if anybody has any questions or anything like that for you or Angela, we'll put all the information in the show notes and they can be sure to check you out there. But hey, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode. Be sure to check us out on all of our other episodes. Catch up on NCMS, our learning environment, where we love and serve our nerdy neighbors, where you can go to ncmsummit.com and catch up on the past 2 years at no charge. On that site, you'll find a link to our Discord, and you can talk to others about the effective strategies and stay up to date on the NCMS one-day event that we're having this fall as we partner with Exponential West. Hey, thanks again for joining us. And if no one else tells you this, just remember, I promise you it's true. Jesus loves you, nerds.